one of my approaches within this curatorial practice for AKN was to look at the ways in which we can talk about slavery without using images of people or archives of people. You know, it's possible. We don't have to dehumanize, but we don't have to replicate the same violence. So in one of my pieces, I'm exploring the ways in which the landscape itself can be used as the visual reference, you know, as the archive, as how people interpret historical sites, how towns are named, how people remember certain places, you know. So I think as an African, as a Black historian, it requires a very deliberate expansion of what you view as the historical record. You know, because when you have oral histories, when you have landscape, you're expanding your canon of knowledge essentially to center people. So I was very interested in the projects that used oral history as the primary form of documentation, because people are telling narratives from their perspective, from their family's perspective, from their connection to the subject, you know, not from a book that was written 100 years ago. So this project has been very interesting to look at the ways in which different sources of history prioritize different people, you know. So the written record most of the time has prioritized, you know, kind of like a Western lens, just by virtue of how this came into the archive. But when we look at the oral history, we're seeing people telling stories from their perspective and people centering their humanity. So I think in terms of correlation between past and present, this idea that we can use and combine different historical sources and challenge the sources that exist is very important to me. Yeah.
I think in discussion of that, one of the things I would ask, because I've always thought that the same, as you are saying, the same violence that was used to document like the history of slavery is kind of almost the same violence that is being used presently to document the stories of survivors of trafficking. And that's mainly because of all the reasons all of us have said. And I think for me, this project was quite interesting in the sense that when I looked at all the different projects, they were really attempting to the best of their ability to shift, as you are saying, the different lenses. Mm-hmm. And that brought me to that whole conversation around like definitions, right? Like you and I, we are talking about historical slavery and then talking about like trafficking and modern slavery right now. And the fact that these definitions and the question of who do these definitions serve? Because as you're saying, the violence is the same. The violence in depiction is the same. The violence of the process itself is the same. The lack of inclusion and diversity is the same. And sometimes I almost feel like if you were to take, like, as you're saying, the oral stories of a historical slave and someone who's going through trafficking right now, they would basically sound almost the same. So why are these definitions? And for me, this was something that was really important in looking at this project, is looking at what survivors and people in the project chose to name things, chose to say things. Wow. So for example, one of the, a good example is it's a graphic novel by Yolred, and they have the perspective of survivors of child soldiers who had been mainly women. And it's interesting again in the sense that when you think about child soldiers, you think about men. And that's because of the depiction in the media that most of the stories on child soldiers are always men. But we have all these girls who have also gone through this experience. Their stories are not being told. And it was so interesting to see how one they questioned the idea of freedom, right? Most of us think about freedom and think that if someone is released, then they're free. And they say, they were questioning the idea of, am I really free? Even if I've left the situation, am I really free? They gave definitions of community, what community means to them, what reintegration means to them, what rehabilitation means to them.